thank you and apologise for last week. Unfortunately, the Chats Board went on much longer than we expected, so I do apologise that we never managed to come out in time to attend to this meeting. I'm very grateful for you to be here today. I don't see that we have any apologies, Karen.
No, Councillor, all the members invited are present just now.
Present. Thank you very much for that. Do you want to start recording the meeting?
The recording's already started, Convener.
Thanks very much for that. Do we have any declarations of interest, members? No indication of declaration of interest. Thank you very much for that. Right. Okay, if the members are happy, we'll start with the Fire and Rescue Service first, item 2.
Yeah, Convener, thanks very much, and please, there's no requirement for an apology. These things happen. If let's say if we can't bend and flex around council business, then it's a sad day for us. So it's a pleasure to sit in front of you again at Scrutiny. It is genuinely something both Marty and myself can look forward to, because it's a great sign off of all the hard work that's been deployed locally across the Renfrewshire Council area itself. So, Convener and committee members, if it's okay, I'll give a kind of high-level overview, then I'll bring Marty in just to go through some of the scorecard that you'll see in your agenda pack. But I guess that the important thing for myself is probably just to give you a wee sit rep in terms of what the resilience looks like across Renfrewshire and across the other areas that I've got direct responsibility for. So I can report our absence level, bearing in mind everything that's going on around COVID and infection rates and so on is sitting quite static at 2.8%. So that's probably one of the lowest figures we've had for a significant period of time. We don't have many events either of self-isolating or indeed COVID cases. I think we're kind of spiking at this present time around one confirmed case, maybe one or two shield at any given time. And that kind of fluctuates, but it's definitely below a handful of people we've got at any one time. And that's testament to the due diligence that Marty and the team are deploying locally back within our stations. I think, again, just for kind of general interest, we'll put forward quite a significant degree of investment into Renfrew Fire Station in terms of some building work that's going on in there. So that's something we'll continue to report back in terms of a new tower that's going to establish in a refurb of the building itself. So again, it's a nice testament to the investment that we've got coming back into the council area in terms of some of our assets. And that's a perfect opportunity just to invite Marty in, and again, Convener and colleagues, if it's okay, what we'll do is Marty will go through the agenda pack, and what we'll do is we'll just come back in, and if there's any points or any queries, etc., please just let us know, and we'll hold and we'll give you a response to it. Thanks, Convener. Marty.
Thank you, Martin.
Thanks, Convener. Just with regards to the sample of the scorecard, as the area commander had touched on previously in the pre-meet, we have been making some adjustments locally just with regards to reporting, etc. One of our drivers is to ensure that, excuse me, our operational officers, the watch commanders, the crew commanders, and also our firefighters are fully engaged in what we're doing across the 3 local authorities. And again, when I'm finished, I'll just invite Area Commander McNeil back in on that. That group have always had performance data sent to them, excuse me, and information they can readily draw upon. That's not new, but it's the ability for that group in particular to be able to stay informed on performance indicators across the area through something that's quite concise, quite pictorial, almost as they're going about their daily business. That the feedback that we've had on that in our engagement sessions and with the staff that we've been facilitating recently has been very encouraging. And a further driver for us obviously is that we know that if our frontline operational staff have that insight into how their work contributes to wider performance, then there's absolutely no doubt that they'll feel more engaged and more likely to be proactive and come forward with ideas and initiatives. And we've always found that some of the best ideas and solutions come from rank and file firefighters. So I wanted to add that some of the slight adjustments that we've been making in terms of reporting have been very well received amongst that particular group. As we know, the reporting, the schedule of the scrutiny meetings doesn't fall into line exactly with the quarterly fiscal reporting that we do traditionally. So we thought it was an ideal opportunity just to bring forward a sample of some of the slight adjustments and improvements that we're making in terms of reporting structures across the area. But I did just want to add that whilst we've provided a sample of that, by the time we come to the next scrutiny meeting, we will absolutely have caught up, if that makes sense. So it was just to give board members that assurance that we will absolutely scrutinise all of the stats together within Q4, but we just thought this was an opportunity, whilst adding structure to our reporting, to perhaps break from going through the report to allow us to do that the next time. And with that, I'll maybe just bring the area commander back in on the scorecard if there's anything he wants to add, convener.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Martin, and thanks, convener. So I guess that you'll be absolutely familiar with the pictogram, because that's what's used within the current iteration of the scrutiny report. But a real key thing for us, and if I can just plant the kind of seed in your mind, convener, I could take you into any one of our stations at any given time, and that scorecard is appended onto a board that's central in every fire station we've got right across the 3 local authority areas. And the really important part of that is we operate in a 7-week cycle locally within the fire stations, and as such, they're local performance indicators and key performance indicators that sit along that reporting timescale. But the real focus, and I guess the nuance of having the scorecards in play, is at any given time when I pull Marty and his team along with the other 2 deputy commanders into the area management team meeting, we look to highlight and theme an area of activity. So where we're starting to see an arrow going up the way, that's probably bucking the trend a wee bit, then by the next reporting month meeting that we have with the area management team, we're actually seeing that trending down quite dramatically. So it's a great analytical tool that connects our firefighters across every single station, whole time our RDS. And more importantly, we use that as the foundation to our area management team meetings and our highlight reporting methodology. And already, if you can imagine looking at that from a November to December to January to February, you can see that chronological timeline, and where we're focusing on, you're seeing a reduction. And that's all good and great, but if you then flip that around, the positive to that is we're actually making a positive impact on a member of the community or somebody who's vulnerable. And that to me was the kind of bit that was missing. It was to align, how do I get that vision, how do I get that thread running from our operational crews to right up through to what the performance is, and that's what will drive their actions locally. But more importantly, it's that action then drives an outcome, or it helps improve an outcome. And it's worked to great effect, and let's say we'll be more than happy to provide those level of inputs as we go through the next year's scrutiny documents. Okay,
thanks very much, John. Any questions, members? Comments, John McNaughton.
Thanks, convener. I appreciate the work that Ross put in particular the presentation with the graphics. I think it helps us understand an awful lot more about what's going on. And I also appreciate this is out of cycle and we're not getting the full report this time. But it's just a question on the diagram, for example, where it shows refuse fires down 19%, 15%, and it's against a 3-month average. Is that a 3-month rolling average? It's just that to me, it would, for something that's as cyclical as that, with the temperature, the weather, and the seasons, it might make more sense to me to know we're up or down against the previous year rather than a 3-month rolling average. But I appreciate it's not that is not for our use primarily; it's for the officers.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Convener, and through yourself, that's a really good point, Councillor, and we can amend and change the reporting methodology. Normally we would look at that on a year-by-year basis, but also the ability probably for the scorecard is to look back that 3-month period, as I mentioned, looking back to see where we were in December, where we're sitting in January, where we're sitting in February, and it's the work that's happening locally in terms of how do we reduce the events of secondary fire, what initiatives are we putting in play with council colleagues, what are we doing in terms of reducing that with colleagues from Police Scotland and so on. So as you'll know, the main report itself, and it's probably something if it's, and again, I'll probably have a one-to-one with the convener, that there's an ability that I can also at the appropriate time bring in what a peer reflection would look like, and that will give you an idea of how we perform against another similar sized LSO area. And I guess that's a really, really good benchmark for us to correlate that against the work of a similar size. But again, if I can bring back onto yourself, Councillor, I think that the ability, we can do one of two things. We can either do it on a year-by-year basis, and that will show you the trend potentially that goes up at the start of the year with grass fires and where we're seeing these trends actually develop. Or indeed, we can break that down and look at that on a month-by-month rolling basis. The analytics and how we can change that is very much, that can be totally adaptable to suit the reader.
Okay, thanks for that, Jim. Councillor Bill Brown.
Right. On the graph we have in front of us, we have 9 non-fire casualties, up 29%. Can you tell us what they are? I can appreciate if there's road traffic accidents, but it just says non-fire.
Yeah, Councillor, and that's probably one of the figures. Although that's seen an increase, I'm looking through the lens of from a fire perspective. I don't see that as a bad figure for us, because that's where we're engaged with doing things other than what you would normally associate us doing from a fire perspective. So that could be, let's say, as you mentioned, road traffic collisions. That could be us mobilised out for somebody who's maybe suffering a heart attack. That could be us going out and working with ambulance colleagues to break down a door to get somebody behind the door. And the minute we deploy and get our boots on the grounds, the minute we then, if we undertake a rescue or undertake a support of bringing somebody out from a building, then that gets recorded against a non-fire casualty. So that could be a wide range, but it's about the other part of the business that we're doing, and that's more around, let's say, getting behind the door, somebody that's maybe slipped or tripped within their home. There's a problem with ambulance colleagues actually getting somebody out from their home, and we'll come into that to offer that level of support. That's one target that I have challenged Marty and his own team, as I have with the rest of the deputy commanders. That's an area, that's a space that we can do more, and I'd like to see that figure going up, because that's showing that we're actually doing something and helping somebody. And again, something that would not normally sit within what you would think my business card would say, from fire and rescue. Is so much more, and that could be, let's say, breaking and entering, it's helping, it's assisting other agencies. But that's a figure I'm looking to push up. That's a figure I'd like to see trajectory, increasing over the course of the next reporting periods.
Okay, thanks for that. Bill, did you want to come back in?
No, that's fine. As I mentioned, road traffic accidents, that's the one that stood out. But as you say, breaking in to find people who have collapsed and things like that, that's fine. It's just that when you look up 29% and 9 non-fires, you just bear duty to just clarify.
Okay, thanks, Bill.
Yep. Convener, could I just come back in just before you bring the other committee member in, if that's okay?
Certainly.
Councillor Brown, one of the things that we look at very closely, and I've mentioned this previously, we get an operational update every morning, and it's something myself and my team look at very, very closely, and almost at a forensic level in terms of what was the operational activity like that 24-hour period of time. But what we have found across the lockdown measures, as you can imagine, and very, very similar to accidental dwelling fires, more people are living at home, more people are now doing most of their business at home, and therefore our demand has probably shifted a wee bit to be more centred around the home. But what comes along with that is it's a great applaudit. Our demographics are as such, a lot of people are living longer in their own homes for an extended period of time. And there was a few reporting periods. There was a number of days that our primary activity was to go and assist ambulance colleagues and assist police colleagues to actually break down a door and rescue somebody who was not subject to anything you would normally associate with fire. But again, that becomes cyclic, and there's a piece of work that's currently underway between the 3 control rooms from police, fire and ambulance to make sure we can get that arrangement probably bottomed out a bit smarter. So if we do get a call coming in with somebody in distress, then that correlation, that synergy between the control rooms takes place really, really quickly. And if we have an asset available, then we will mobilise that back out. And sometimes we're there for an extended period of time dealing with somebody who's slipped or tripped, and we're exercising our trauma care package, waiting for the arrival of an ambulance. It could be anything up to an hour, anything up to 2 hours away. So it's a part of the business that probably colleagues don't get a full impact of. And I'm pleased it's generated this conversation this morning.
Okay. Thanks very much for that, Jim. Councillor Max McClan. Max.
Hi. With the sort of new reports, and I appreciate that it's just been put together in that way, are there plans to highlight if there's particular areas that are causing problems, like if a figure is made up with a problem, say in one particular ward or one particular area of Renfrewshire? Because obviously previously we had the stuff split down by wards, and you could see sometimes that there was some areas of Renfrewshire there was no problems at all, or hardly a very low level of certain issues. I mean, my own ward, for instance, always has lots of unwanted fire alarms, and that's partly because the hospital's there, so there's always a lot of probably the vast majority of the problem fire alarms in Renfrewshire come in my ward, and I was pleased to see that there's a focus on that. But I just wanted to know if there's plans to sort of highlight where there's maybe one particular area that's causing most of the issues.
Yeah, Convener, are you okay for me just to
Yes,
come back
please
in?
do.
Councillor McLaren, thanks again for that question. So I guess if I just bring you back to the point that Marty had kind of mentioned earlier, unfortunately this scrutiny fell out with our normal reporting methodology. So the previous scrutiny document is something we will always bring forward into these meetings. It will still give you the ward breakdown. We thought this morning what we would actually give you is probably an inward-looking lens into how we manage performance locally across the stations and across the personnel within Renfrewshire Council area. So this is something we only use internally at this point, and it's to target the work that's going on locally within that 7-week cycle, and more importantly, how I can start to highlight areas of demand and then get the mindset and the group think wrapped up in terms of how do we reduce that. So this will be unique for this scrutiny committee only. We will default back onto our normal reporting processes and protocols for the next scrutiny meeting.
Great, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Councillor McCann. Thanks very much for that. Thank you. Can we go on to item number 2?
Convener, could I just come back in there? There was just a couple other points we were going to touch on. If you could,
please
give us that, please. So Marty will touch on the Take 5 campaign and also a thematic action plan update. So just a few small updates, then we can move down the agenda. Marty.
Okay. Right. Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Area Commander. So the two other items, Councillor, that we plan to touch on. So the Spring Action Plan, first of all, just to give members a sense of what we're doing there, that's already underway. That's running from the 22nd of February to the 19th of April. So as I said previously on the pre-meet, we're at that time of year where for the Fire and Rescue Service, and as far as the campaign is concerned, the risk profile changes slightly as we come out the winter months into a period of milder weather. With the Spring Action Plan, there's a particular focus on the outdoors, and our messaging there is broken down into 3 main areas. Deliberate fire setting and wildfires are the first 2 areas, and they are obviously linked, at least potentially. So the service has introduced a revised wildfire strategy, just acknowledging the rise in extreme weather events across the UK and beyond in recent years. As we've touched on previously, there's the added consideration this year that as COVID restrictions are gradually lifted, it might be that people are more inclined to travel to campsites and remote locations and the like. So for us in the Fire and Rescue Service, if we have that potential mix of dry weather, dead winter foliage, and then we add to that barbecues and campfires and the likes, we need to be mindful of that basically, and that's why we're attempting to educate across national media and local media and also social media. So ultimately for us, the Spring Action Plan, it's about education and awareness to basically to keep people safe, whether they live in Renfrewshire or whether they are just visiting, as the restrictions gradually ease and allow them to do so. With regards to open water, again, I touched on this previously. It's largely it's in a way it's the same risk factors that, you know, as the temperature starts to creep up, we have that issue where some of our local water courses, like the Black Cart and the Calder, can start to look quite appetising on a sunny day, but there just isn't that awareness at times that the water temperatures in particular are still extremely low at this time of year. And if you add in additional factors such as the potential, at least for alcohol to be involved in some instances, and tragically we've seen in the past that these are situations that can get away from people very, very quickly. So alongside the fire risks, a lot of our messaging has been directed towards water safety, and members should see quite a lot of that just coming over their television screens and across local media just in the weeks ahead. If I can move on to take 5, convener, if that's all right. So as far as a quick recap is concerned, Take 5 is an initiative that's been introduced to good effect elsewhere in the Fire and Rescue Service. The intention generally is to drive down instances of unwanted fire alarm calls by educating and creating awareness within the buildings and the workplaces that produce the bulk of these incidents. There's a national focus and a number of different strategic drivers for this, which I'm sure others will have spoke about at this forum. But I think most importantly for us, it's about ensuring that our crews are available for more meaningful work, such as actual emergencies or the other forms of community engagement that we're often being called away from to attend fire alarm calls that are actually preventable. So in terms of what we're going to do locally, we'll be introducing the Take 5 initiative over Q1, and Station Commander Davy Fothergill from the P&P function, he's going to be in touch with colleagues from the council and others across the next few days to fully explain just what we're doing, and hopefully just to secure that little bit of buy-in that we require from some other stakeholders. We're not asking anything of anyone other than really just to assist us with the awareness piece, and we have all that messaging lined up and ready to go. We're very conscious of the fact that pretty much everyone's stretched just now, and COVID is still largely everyone's business as usual, I feel like. So the intention is not to be overly onerous and asking anything of anyone else. The concept itself is very, very straightforward. If we can educate staff on the Take 5 mnemonic, which is quite simple in design, essentially it's just an acronym, and then if they're sort of carrying the spirit of that with them, if you like, as they're going about their daily business, then it's been proven that has the potential to influence behaviours in a positive way. So essentially we're encouraging people to take a moment before they undertake a particular workplace activity. More often than not, it's as simple as that. So an example might be somebody who's, I don't know, about to use a steam cleaner, for example, in a certain setting, and the message is, have a think about what you're about to do and how it might affect the fire alarm system, that sort of thing. Can you open a window or a door safely, obviously, and create additional ventilation? So that's the type of thing we're encouraging people to think about. And simple as it sounds, that the Take 5 initiative has realised a cumulative 20% reduction in UFAS incidents over a 12-month period when it was introduced in City of Edinburgh. So as simple as it sounds, we know it can be effective. So that's really the crux of what we're trying to achieve. Part of the discussion that we've had within the service is just about our ability to measure the effectiveness of the initiative over the next couple of months, given the fact that we know there's the potential for UFAS to rise slightly as we come out of the lockdown period gradually, and then people start to gradually inhabit the buildings that they've moved back to the house from, if you like. So the flip side of that, though, is that equally we think it's actually a good time to get the initiative in place and try to offset the potential for some of that increase in activity. And again, just with that, and on both those points, convener, I'll obviously open it up to questions, but if I can just put it back to the area commander in case there's any points he wants to add.
Yeah, thanks, Martin, and through yourself, convener. I think anything at all that we can start to impact an unwanted fire alarm system is probably twofold. It prevents a disruption to the premises itself in terms of potentially the alarm going off, and never more critical at a time of schooling, where we need to maximise the amount of school and class time that our young people need. But more importantly, the ability to provide that level of capacity back into our own fire and rescue service, so we can probably start to divulge and maybe start to look on some youth engagement piece around fire reach courses, to maybe look about other initiatives that we can put our resources against. But if you, again, just to put it up into a degree of context, about 40% of our operational activity on occasion is lined up against unwanted fire alarm, and every time there is an alarm actuation, it's either 1, 2 or potentially 3 fire engines that end up mobilising out to that. And when that's happening, then we're creating gaps where those fire appliances should actually be. And therefore, if we do get called to an emergency, rather than being there within 3, 4, 5 minutes, you're then waiting on another station coming online, and the time scale around how quickly we can react to events of real fire starts to give me a degree of concern. So I think it will work really, really well. We've run it. It's been up and running in East Ren for probably the last kind of 6 or 7 weeks, and we will report back in to yourself, convener, and committee members, because the evaluation will parallel from the commencement date, as Marty had said, in Q1, and we'll be able to give you a direct correlation in regards to how well it is operating and what capacity that it's actually freeing up for us. But more importantly, it's not just to create capacity, it's about how then we have the ability to redirect that back in to look at other initiatives and other ways we can improve outcomes. And that's me, convener. Again, more than happy. I know councillors have got their hands up. More than happy for me to direct any questions back to Marty, because he's obviously on Mark this morning. So more than happy for any questions.
Thanks for that, John. Councillor Bill Brown.
All right. I was asked back into Renfrewshire House to have a look at it with post-COVID improvements or layouts in store. And the question I asked them, will you be updating the fire evacuation plan? You know, because obviously there are now barriers, corridors, etc. So taking that out into the wider community, will you have a plan in place, or will we be reacting to, as places reopen, checking their fire safety plans to make sure that people, the staff and customers, are able to operate in safety?
Okay. Jim?
Yep. Convener, yeah, I'll come back in there. It's a really good point. As Marty said, there's a wee bit of kind of short circuit has taken place with everybody working at home, and businesses not been open for that period of time. So there's a duty in the there's an absolute legislation duty on the post holder, who is noted as the responsible person within these premises. But all the way through COVID, we've also been undertaking virtual audits of some of our high risk premises under the Fire Scotland Act, as you'd imagine. But we stand ready to make sure that transition, as we start to see buildings opening back up, we will use intelligence as far as possible in terms of any post-fire audits. So every time there's a fire on a commercial premise or a non-domestic premise, I've got an enforcement team that absolutely are alive to that, and they come back in and they'll undertake a fire audit inspection within a few days of it, and that then puts the kind of direct learning straight back into the duty holder. But there's probably just and it's a really good point, there's probably just a wee education piece that probably needs to be maybe even coordinated, and at least, you know, some form of communication just to check the evacuation routes and means of escape and external doors to that safe area is pretty much all taken care of. So again, it's not something I can directly impact, councillor, but it's definitely something when we're having these audits and we're having these conversations we will be playing into in terms of sense checking and safeguarding the routes of escape for these premises.
Thanks for that. Thanks, Bill. Do you want to come back in? Are you okay?
No, it's just a general concern for the safety of staff and patrons of various places, because I'm on the licensing board and sometimes you get horror stories there, and it's just something that could almost slip our mind, but we need to be aware of the fact that, as I say, I was in Renfrewshire House, totally new layout, one-way systems, barriers, etc. And we need to make sure that folk are able to get in and out safely. Okay, thanks, Bill. Councillor John McNaughton.
Thanks, convener. Clearly the unwanted fire alarm has been the focus of much of our discussion over the last few years, and we were particularly interested when this concept of the Take 5 was brought to us. I just really want to acknowledge that the speed with which it's been brought to Renfrewshire, because we initially thought it was some years away, actually, after, and that the pilot was in East Renfrewshire. And I very much appreciate the acceleration in that and rolling it out in Renfrewshire, and I look forward to the results of that.
Thanks very much, John. Thank you. Thanks very much, Jim and Martin, for that. Right, you'd spotlight on thematic action plan. Martin, is that you?
Yeah, apologies, convener. We've actually, I think we've covered all the points in the agenda from a fire and rescue perspective. Yeah.
Right, okay. Right, we could do it, well, I think we'll go back to Police Scotland Scrutiny report, if that's okay for members. Welcome, James, to the meeting.
Thanks, convener, and sincerest apologies for my late entrance. I would love to be able to blame Teams, but I'm afraid it was an IQ issue rather than an IT issue, and a diary problem for myself. But I'm here now. I just want to submit, if it's not been done, submit apologies for Chief Superintendent David Duncan, if that's not been done already.
Yes.
This is my first full scrutiny board meeting, so please bear with me. I'll just take everybody through the kind of highlights of the report as I see them, broadly similar to the ones that I picked out in the pre-agenda meeting. In terms of violence and antisocial behaviour, Group 1 crimes of violence, there's been a fairly significant decrease of 11.2% in the previous year, which, you know, in broad terms means 26 fewer victims of crime. Now, 55% of Group 1 crimes have occurred in private spaces. Now, that's obviously everything in this report, as I'm sure it's the same with the fire service, it has to be taken through that view of COVID and lockdown and various other things. That's actually a 10% increase in terms of Group 1 crimes that occurred in private spaces from this time last year. It was 45% last year, so that's a reflection of people obviously being locked up in their homes. 204 assaults on emergency workers, which is 5 more than the previous year. The Royal Alexandra Hospital, as mentioned there, has been a significant repeat location. To be fair, I think that's, generally speaking, that's isolated incidents, 1 or 2 incidents that's thrown that statistic in there. I'd just like to draw the group's attention to the current Your Safety Matters campaign, which we've got on the go here just now in Police Scotland. It's being rolled out, and we're trying to get a bit of governance around that and what that actually looks like in practical terms. But what it basically means is that police officers and staff should be they don't need to expect to be assaulted in the line of duty in the course of their work, and that you know, their safety does matter. And what we're doing is we're individually looking at scrutinising scenarios, looking at how people repeat officers who are continually victim of assaults, police assaults and various other things, and what can we do to help those officers. It's also about making sure that the officers are properly supported as any offenders are brought to justice through the court, etc. And we're increasing our officer safety training. Officer safety training has been off now for a year, and we're going to increase the courses to 2 days, which is going to present us with some resourcing difficulties, but we'll work through that because it's important that people are retrained and given that increased awareness of threats that they face on a day-to-day basis. Moving on to acquisitive crime, pleased to report that it is quite positive in relation to acquisitive crime. Again, I would not take full credit for that, but I think COVID and lockdown has a lot to do with it. A decrease of 13.4% in the previous year, and that's generally down to common theft and theft-based shoplifting. However, the unfortunate thing, and it's a global pandemic almost, I would say, is the increase in fraud and online scams. It really is something that I feel very strongly about. It's almost weekly I'm seeing incidents coming across my desk in operational reports of people who have fell victim to crime, of fraud, whether it's through telephone scams or online scams or whatever else. Actually myself, anecdotally, almost weekly I get a text message or an email which I am able to recognise as a scam. And we've got the Take 5 for Fraud campaign, and I do feel as if we're we're continually have to refresh that message with ourselves and through our partners. Those leaflets, etc., obviously been distributed in the council tax leaflets and various other things to try and raise awareness, but it really is an ongoing battle on a global scale, and it's very difficult, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, for us to detect a lot of these crimes that happen locally, but they're not perpetrated locally. They're perpetrated very much often from abroad, and from cyber criminals who are very, very good at what they do. Moving on to domestic abuse, I've got something to say about missing people, but we'll touch on that in a minute. But moving on to domestic abuse, there's a decrease on the sheet there of 9.9% in the previous year, which I'd said before, I find that relatively surprising, and I think we might be seeing a bit of a lag just with lockdown. Obviously, there is various measures in place in relation to tackling domestic abuse, various meeting groups, MATAC and MARAC, and we've also got the disclosure scheme, the DISTAS disclosure scheme for victims of domestic abuse who may find themselves in relationships with partners who have a history of domestic violence. We've also got the safe spaces and various other third-party reporting projects as well. In terms of proactive work, drug supply charges have increased by 9.5%, which again I was relatively surprised with. It's up to 115, and there's a 21% increase in proactive work, which is brilliant from our perspective. Moving on, and just in the fact that we're in the anniversary of the first day of lockdown last year, I'd just like to report to the group on the kind of Optala activity in the recent months. We've got 600, this is from the 1st of January to the 16th of March. We've got 667 COVID Tala tagged incidents. These are mainly regards to house parties and non-compliance. It's an increase of 187 on the previous quarter, so it's a 39% increase. There's been 1,653 dispersals over this period in Renfrewshire, and that's an increase of 585 on the previous reported quarter. 355 fixed penalty notices have been issued over the specified period, and these are predominantly for breaches within private dwellings. That's a 34% increase on the previous quarter. We are certainly moving through the 4 E's more swiftly, and I think it's probably a combination of repeat calls to locations and also people, the public, probably getting a bit fatigued and just deciding to do their own thing rather than following the rules as much. In terms of breach of quarantine, there's been 4 fixed penalty issues issued for identified breach of quarantine within Renfrewshire, and breach of travel restrictions. There's been 47 fixed penalty notices issued for breach of travel regs within the specified period, 98 persons dispersed. On the subject of missing persons, which I did mention, I'd just like to touch on an excellent piece of work which is ongoing just now between the Community Hub and Police Scotland. We can't take the credit for it, it's really down to the Community Hub, but it's a brilliant resource for us. There's 2 full-time community mental health nurses stationed in at the Hub just now, which is absolutely fantastic because it assists us greatly with one of the things that we are increasingly involved in and will continually be increasingly involved in as we hopefully come out of lockdown in the coming months, and that's mental health issues, mental health calls. Just for a bit of context, in November last year to February last year in Renfrewshire, Police Scotland had 556 concern for calls and 99 missing person calls, and those concern for person calls could really range from anything to I need the police, I'm feeling suicidal, or a relative finding a note, or I haven't seen or heard from someone in a few days, so on and so forth. There's a variety, and it's very difficult as well to contextualise the amount of work that causes. Obviously, one of our primary focuses is on keeping people safe, and that is our fundamental role. So we are ultimately the last port of call for these types of incidents, and it's oftentimes that the ambulance will defer to us, or we will be able to dispatch a resource to these incidents and the ambulance won't, and that's just where we find ourselves. So having a full-time resource like 2 community mental health nurses based in the Renfrewshire Hub is absolutely fantastic, because oftentimes we are the right resource for the initial response to that type of incident, but we are certainly not the right resource to maintain that incident and take that incident forward. And I would welcome any of the committee here to drive past an A&E, either at the Southern General or the RAH at any given time of the day, and you will more than likely encounter a police car sitting outside that hospital, and that more than likely will be with somebody who's suffering a mental health episode or needs that help and that intervention that we put in place. Over and above that, I'll just touch on a few of the other things. Take 5 for fraud, I have already mentioned, and it's crucial. It's national for us, and obviously it's one of the big factors in relation to our strategic objectives in tackling crime in a cyber age, in a digital age rather. And it's one of the things that we have to keep reassuring that message and putting that message across. Over and above that, and you'll be aware of all the stuff that's going on in the media just now in relation to policing, particularly down south. We do have 2 kind of dedicated units set up in response. It was initially set up in response to the pandemic and to COP26, which is obviously coming up at the end of the year. We've got the Force Reserve Unit and the Conventional Reserve Unit. The Force Reserve Unit is basically a group of mutual aid officers who are public order trained and who are there for fast deployment to any pop-up demonstrations or whatever. We are able to continually bid for their assistance to deal with local issues. I know Renfrew Town Centre is one such issue, which has been ongoing with antisocial behaviour, etc. And we've got the Conventional Resource Unit as well, which has been stood up in light of the second wave of the pandemic. And it's basically set up of officers who are predominantly 9 to 5 based in Kilmarnock and various other offices like that, who are not seen as being essential just now, and they've been stood up and placed in this kind of support unit. And again, local territorial divisions can bid for their assistance at any point in time. So that's pretty much it from myself, convener. Obviously, if anybody's got any questions, I'll come in.
Yeah, any questions, members, or any comments, Councillor McNaughton?
Thanks, convener. It was just a reference that was made to the delay or possibly a lag in the reporting of domestic abuse incident. So I take it from that what you're referring to there is maybe a difficulty in reporting them because of the COVID circumstances, or is it something else? And if it is that, is there anything that we can do to address that?
So actually, I feel confident enough that there is a lot of that people do have the confidence to report things. I, as the area commander here for Renfrewshire, you may believe this or not, I actually scrutinise every single domestic incident that takes place that's reported to us, and I have that operational knowledge of every single incident to make sure that it's appropriately dealt with and that we've got appropriate care plans in place for the victims. What I would say is that we are following a national trend in relation to that. Year-to-date incidents, domestic incidents, have fallen by 7.8% on previous year-to-date. This is for K Division, a total of 2,749 in contrast to the increase noted at force level. So we're slightly below that, they're 3.6%. Crime incidents decreased by 9.9% in previous year-to-date, as compared to a 1.7% decrease at the force level. So it's, as I say, there is more methods of reporting domestic abuse than anything else. We obviously have great partnerships with the local authority, with housing, with social work, and we've got our own domestic abuse investigation unit as well. So again, what I would say is that probably we're in a better place than we've ever been in relation to proactively preventing domestic abuse. We're obviously never going to be able to eradicate it, but in relation to preventing repeat offenders, we also have obviously a number of domestic abuse tariff offenders that we proactively police, whether that's in relation to their own bail conditions, not to approach or contact victims, or actually have curfew bail themselves. So we really do quite a lot of work behind the scenes and every visit to a domestic abuse offender is actually potentially preventing another incident. Victims of domestic abuse who are seen as high risk are also proactively managed in relation to their safety and making sure that they're not being coerced back into any kind of relationship or unwanted contact that they may not want. So what I would just try to reassure yourself that the amount of work that goes on behind the scenes, I don't think it's down to people being reluctant to report. I would certainly hope that's not the case. What I do notice anecdotally is that there is a number of domestic abuse incidents which appear to now relate to lockdown and lockdown incidents. I'm increasingly seeing it. Mr. and Mrs. are in the house and an argument ensues over his drinking or him being depressed about lockdown or her being depressed about lockdown. So obviously we're in a unique environment, a microclimate almost in relation to everything that we're facing just now. So I dare say we'll see some kind of change in the trend as we start to come out of lockdown.
Okay. Councillor McNaughton, okay.
Yeah, that was very helpful, thanks. And it's good to see that it's reflected across the board, not just in Renfrewshire. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Bill Brown.
All right. On missing persons, I noticed that you talk about young people, and from before we were told there was quite a lot in care. Is it still the case that if you find someone repeatedly running away, disappearing, you organise a case conference with the reporter, with social work, child protection, and so on? The other thing is that it used to be, common talk that you couldn't report somebody missing for 2 days, but I notice now that there's seem to be picking up very quickly. Somebody says, we haven't seen my Auntie Jeannie since 9 o'clock this morning. Where is she? Are you picking up on them quicker now?
So I'll be honest with you, Councillor, the 2 days thing, I think that's a red herring. It's never really been the case that we've never had any kind of position like that, if I'm being honest. Each incident, obviously I referred to 99 incidents of missing persons between November and February for ourselves. To be honest with you, each incident's really taken in its own merit, and we've got processes in place to manage and assess risk around missing persons. The way it works is if a person's concerned that somebody's missing or they've not seen them, they would obviously phone 101 or 999 depending on the circumstances. If it's a case that I've not seen my aunt for a wee while and she usually reports in, and I'm a wee bit worried about her, I've chapped her door and I can't get in, we would go and speak to the initial reporter for that, and we would go to the house and commence with inquiry, commensurate with the level of risk and the information that we're given. If it's the case that somebody goes home from their work today and they find a suicide note in their house from their spouse saying, I've had enough, I can't take this anymore, thanks very much, I love you, we would obviously meet that with the appropriate level of response, which would be high risk, I would suggest, and that can be resources, anything from helicopters to dogs to search teams to specific SciComs work to try and identify location, incoming, outcoming call data and various other things. We're very well rehearsed at dealing with these types of incidents, and the sergeants in particular have an operational management, sergeants and inspectors have an operational management which is absolutely first class in relation to it. And I've got absolute confidence in it, and when somebody's deemed high risk, it then prompts a gold response, so superintendent involvement basically, and there's scrutiny meetings and various other things like that. In relation to the young persons, there's obviously a substantial amount of governance around them from social work, from the care homes themselves and various other places. We have a reporting system which we will submit for any child that we're involved with, whether the child goes missing or whether the child's involved in any kind of criminality or vulnerability. And I guess you could say it's much the same thing. It's a vulnerable persons database, and when reports are submitted for that, they're looked at by our concern hub, which is staffed by detective officers and police officers, and that then is discussed at length with social work, and any subsequent case conferences are then raised. I myself have, as area commander here, have put in place recently a regular, it's probably going to be quarterly meeting with all of the local authority and private care homes in Renfrewshire to discuss ongoing issues. We can't discuss individual cases, we do that on a case-by-case basis with the care homes, but for data protection reasons, they can't bring to the platform with other care homes on the teams meeting individual cases, but we can discuss ongoing issues. So there's a lot of good work gets done in regards to that. So I hope that covers it.
Councillor Brown, yes.
Yeah, that's fine. It's just if you get Facebook on or the news, it's full of folk disappearing, and sometimes they're found fairly quick. And other times it's months later that they're found sadly in the river. And of course, the young chap in Livingston, I think it is, he's disappeared about 2 years ago, and still nothing of him. You know, sad for the individual, the family, and the community that know him.
Okay, thanks very much. Jim.
There is unfortunately cases where people become long-term missing persons, and however, I would reassure again that there's huge amount of scrutiny and investigation goes on to all of these in regards to the circumstances and what's taking place. We also work very closely with missing person charities, Bernardo's and Missing Person nationally, who are working with the Scottish Government for actually to look at best practice in Renfrewshire in relation to missing person inquiries as well. So we do a lot of close work. Without discussing individual cases, you may be aware of a long-term missing person from the Paisley area who has still to this day not been found, and there's obviously a pending murder trial in regards to that. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes in regards to the circumstances around that person going missing. What is their lifestyle, and who have they been speaking to? So very, very thorough investigation using a lot of different techniques and a lot of different specialisms, which we're able to tap into, obviously being a national force.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Thank you. No more questions or comments, members, on that? Thank you for that. Item 5, local issues. Members, do you have any questions? No. Councillor Norton.
Thanks, Convener. I could have raised it under the report, but it was really just a comment, primarily for the police, that as we're coming out of, and I know your statistics relate to the period up to 31st of December, but just anecdotally, we're picking up from a number of sources and a number of councils that the significant increase in minor, relatively insignificant, but graffiti and such like, particularly in the town centre area. Now, given the success of our team up to clean up, which is exponentially increasing with as the better weather comes in, with individuals going out and cleaning up, it was just to highlight the importance of tackling this, and it's as much to our own officers as it is to the police, through the wardens. But I think it's important to support the team up to clean up community, the efforts they're making, that we don't sit back and just let this graffiti increase exponentially. We really need to clamp down on it as much as we can, but that was all.
Okay, thanks for that. Oliver, before I bring in Councillor Max-McCann.
Hi. What I wanted to raise was it's really a situation that's come up over the last week, and as many of you know, I also work in an MP's office. Now, one of our local councillors had his house.
Max, I think your screen's, I think she's frozen. Give her a wee second. I think she's a problem with her Wi-Fi. No, I think she's gone. John, do you know about this? Oh, there she is. Back. Sorry,
yeah,
Mag,
sorry, my
lost you.
connection dropped out. My connection dropped out for some reason. I don't know why. Yeah, to go back to where I was, the situation is that the councillor's house was attacked, and where there are any credible threats to an MP, for instance, there is a whole sort of process in place and a team, and that's escalated incredibly quickly where it looks like there may be any danger to an MP. And I was actually quite surprised at how little was in place for councillors surrounding this similar area. And I know the stuff with MPs, and I think it's MSPs as well, have something similar, came about after the situation with Joe Cox some years ago. But really, it's not so much for an answer just now, really, but I was wondering if this is something that the partners in this board could have a look at, because I do think it's something that we should maybe have, look at what protocols are in place and make sure councillors are actually aware of what support and help they can get when situations like this might occur. Because, like I said, I know from working in MP's office, the escalation is incredibly quick and it's very, very serious. And I was actually quite surprised at how low level this particular matter was treated with. When, we're just, I think as councillors, we're probably just as much a threat of somebody deciding that we're a target as an MP or an MSP. That's really, so it's not so much for an answer just now, but I think it's something I would like us to the partners to look at and maybe make sure that councillors are aware of what is available to them and what is in place should anything like this happen to them.
Okay, thanks for that, Mags. James, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, it was just to reassure Councillor McClaren that I would say that if we are dealing with some specific threat, I know the individual incident you're talking about, and to my knowledge, there's nothing to suggest, or nothing certainly 100% to suggest that the incident that took place because of the person being a councillor. What I would say is if that's not the case, then we absolutely need to know about that, and we need to deal with it. But my understanding is it's kind of anecdotal information, and I believe it could be the case. I think the correlation between MPs, MSPs is if individuals are being targeted specifically because of their post, their job, their standing on a political issue, that would be wholly different. And I would say that for the councillor involved, if that was the case, then it would absolutely escalate things for me. There has been quite a lot of visits to the councillor by the community policing team since the incident has took place as well. So I just want to reassure you that just because someone's a councillor and not an MSP or an MP wouldn't, for me, really significantly change the response. If they're being targeted because of their political position on something or something they've said in relation to their role or their job or their post, that's absolutely very serious, and that's something that we would take very seriously, but I don't think that's the case in this circumstance. Okay,
thanks very much for that. Mags, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, no, it was only really, I'm aware that in my other role, we regularly get told.
There is a protocol.
There is a protocol, and we get told regularly what's in place, and we have, information, that we can very quickly go to actually be able to be aware of what supports and what is there, what we have available to us, particularly even if just, the sort of the side of mental health and things like that, and how people feel about things like this. And I totally understand that this may not be able to be attributed to, anything particular to do with the person being a councillor, but even when that is the case with, I found, just because I have been involved in a credible threat, what appeared to be a credible threat with my MP, we're talking about just people coming back, and and I know people check, but just all the stuff that was put in place at that point, and the recommendations that were made to the Parliament at that point, about how they should be viewing the situation and stuff like that, and making sure that they were aware. In that instance, it was that the person shouldn't use public transport at all. They should be taking taxis everywhere. That was what happened in that situation. But it's a dialogue between all the parties involved, and like I says, the people who could be in this situation, and all parties, like making sure that we all know what should be done in these circumstances.
Okay, I think I'll take that up with the Chief Exec, Councillor McLaren, with the other services as well. Councillor McNaughton.
It was just to further comment on that. I mean, I think that there would be merit, and it's primarily, I think, for the council rather than the police, but to re-examine the procedures, as in what the councillors do if they're faced with X, Y, or Z situation. Because particularly when we get the regular reports on the major serious crime increasing, and if only to know who to approach if something happens. I mean, I think we could do a bit more on that front. So without addressing this particular incident, I think that we could usefully improve our own knowledge for the councillors of what to do and when.
Yeah, right. So we'll do that. I'll take it up with Sandra. I think there is a protocol, but maybe a refresher for members. Oliver, you want to come in?
Yes, actually, I think that's effectively what I was going to say. In the past, members have tended to approach either Ken Graham or Sandra or myself in instances of this nature, and then I've tended to be the go-between with the police as the single point of contact with the police around arranging appropriate support. And we have had instances where elected members have had direct threats or whatever that have come in, and the kind of response, Councillor McLaren, has been very similar to what would be put in place for MSPs or MPs around the advice and support provided by the police in those circumstances, and I think it's worked well. I think the point that Councillor McNaughton's making, and indeed yourself, Councillor McLaren, is absolutely right. We probably need to just reinforce that opportunity for elected members to understand that support can be made available and is available, and how to access that. It's the kind of thing that post-elections I have done in the talk that I do around my role and the support that can be provided for elected members as well. My role is the single point of contact, but things have moved on quite significantly since the last election, the local election, in relation to how frequent, I suppose, these incidents can be, and the pressures of being a public person within the local community. And so I think your point is right in terms of just maybe formalising a little bit more how councillors can access that information. And I'll certainly take it away and speak to Ken Graham about how we do that, so that we've got a formal procedure in place, so that that's easily accessible for all elected members, and can be found, I suppose, on the member support websites and so on, which I think is really what you're saying, Councillor McLaren. It's just, how would you access that? But I have to say that the support that has been provided by the police in the past, when we've had sort of credible concerns, if you like, from elected members around their role in the public, as a public-facing person, has been very much welcomed and has been of great use. And it has been the kind of practical advice that you referred to, Councillor McLaren, about how to arrange surgeries, or whether to be accompanied in certain situations, or other types of practical advice that you would recognise from your role with MPs or MSPs as well. Okay. So hopefully that helps, but I'll take it away with Ken Graham and work out how to make that more publicly available, if you like, to elected members.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think we tend to forget, if we're told something in that whole melee of just being elected, that things like that aren't the first thing in your mind, and it very much probably feeds into our own councillors' sessions, where our training sessions and things like that as well. I think it's really important that maybe it should be something we're reminded of, maybe on an annual basis or something like that, and make it be much more easy to find the information if you need it, and you kind of know exactly where to go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally get that. And it's also the kind of thing that I don't like to put too much emphasis on in those first meetings, because the hope is that it doesn't arise. And I don't want to put fear into people who've just been newly elected and should be excited about the opportunities that that offers, rather than concerned about it, how that might impact on them if things went slightly awry. The other thing that just was mentioned was around graffiti removal and so on as well earlier on, and I would just like to reassure elected members that Street Scene and Wardens are both actively looking at that and programming getting removal of the graffiti, particularly where there's sectarian elements, which has happened in places like Erskine and Renfrew in particular. And in fact, even street lighting teams have been involved in that process, where things are slightly more out of reach as well. So it's been a combined effort, but it is something that we're working on as a council in terms of the removal of graffiti and other paraphernalia, if you like, that has appeared at various points over recent weeks.
Okay, thanks for that. I think that will assure some members that were asking that question were asked me the question for the board earlier, and I passed it to Oliver this morning. Is there any other questions, any other local issues that members want to ask about? No? Right, okay, well, I think that concludes the meeting for today. Thank you very much for your attendance and your contribution, and